Greetings everyone, my name is Greg. In this video I am going to talk about the part 2 of losing my faith, that being the missing time that I had. Now I recognize that what I'm going to go into in this is not evidence for anybody else, but it is something that has convinced me that there is something more as far as alien life that is getting here. Now, the question as to why these things were happening with me is something that had gone through my mind at one point. It's something that seems to be typical with people that do go through this. The idea that they were picked for some specific reason. That's not necessarily the case. I do not feel that I am anything special, be it bloodline or be it anything else. Now, the time that this was happening in my life was when I was about mid-20s. I was thinking back to the earliest that I could say there was something. I can't say alien, but that would be at the age of 10 when I had my parents, or the church that I went to, they were showing a video on this rapture and Mark of the Beast bullshit, and something had embraced me. I felt arms around me, and I heard very clearly in my mind that this isn't true. Don't believe this. And all of that. But what I also had heard very clearly was, now is not the time for you to know about these things, but the time will come when you need to. So for now, forget about it. And it was almost as if a post-hypnotic suggestion was planted in my subconscious, because I did forget about it completely for 6 years. Then at one point I came home from church, and before lunch I was flipping through the channels, and I came across this TV preacher named Jack Van Impe. And I stopped on it, and I was listening to him and getting irritated, because even as a Christian, that dude rubbed me the wrong fucking way. Well, at one point he had mentioned the word rapture, and the only thing I can attribute it to is a post-hypnotic suggestion. That whatever had guided me from a very young age was back, and that was when I felt directed to go into the Bible and start to read it and study it. Now, I don't remember if that was before or after I had said in a type of prayer that I wanted to know everything there is to know about God, because I realized around 16 that if what I had been taught with Christianity was true, that I had to make a choice between this God and character and this Satan. And the only way to actually make a choice between the two, I would need to know everything that I could about both. Otherwise, I'm not really making an intelligent, informed choice. It would only be going with what I had been conditioned to think as a child. And that's not really making a choice. If you're only going with what you were told growing up, and you're just running with that, then the roll of the dice as far as what belief system you were taught is what you're going to go with. You're not thinking at all, which is exactly what a lot of people do. But I started going into the Bible, and I had felt whatever had been guiding me. The first question that was asked was, who are you going to follow, us or the church? So at 18, I went and met with the preacher at the church, and I had said to him, I know what you teach on Sundays, but I want to know what you really believe about God and Jesus. He got pissed off at the question. And I snapped back at him, I don't need you, I don't need this church, I learned more on my own in an hour than I ever have from you, and I got up and walked out. I wrote off churches on contact at that point. It wasn't a hard decision as far as who are you going to follow type of thing, because if the preacher had reacted to my question a little bit differently, it may have been harder for me to walk away from the church, or I may not have done that at that time. I don't know. Which would have changed all of what happened later, I'm sure. But nothing happened right away. Then it was, I continued to study and I continued being a Christian and so forth, but then in my 20s, around 24, the question entered my mind of even if you would be accepted into heaven type of thing, could you go along with seeing somebody else tortured? Somebody born in, say, India, and they were raised to be a Buddhist. And they didn't hurt anybody, they didn't kill anybody, they just believed in Buddhism. Could you go along with them being tortured? I thought about that, and I thought about that hard. And I ultimately realized, no, I can't. Like it or not, for good or for ill, I can't go along with that. And that correlated with a question of who are you going to follow, us or Jesus and the Bible. That was harder because of the programming that I had undergone with Christianity. The thing is, I do feel that the inner chaos that I was having over that question, over the issue of Jesus, and the issue of not wanting initially to let go of religion, is what was the catalyst for the alien abductions, missing time, things of that nature. Because one thing that I had noticed, and I mentioned it in my report to the Army, was I don't understand why, but all of my missing time and alien experiences centered around the subject of religion. Because in my 20s, around 24, I was very interested in the religion subject, and I was researching the Bible and studying the Bible in depth on a daily basis. And the first case of missing time I'll go into now, because in a sense you need to kind of understand where this all got started and how. I was working at an adult bookstore. I had just started there not too long before this. And a friend of mine that worked in a convenience store had called me at one point and asked me if I could pick him up at the mall. He had gone to the mall with his mom, and he didn't want to stay and hang out with her and as much as she wanted to shop. And without hesitation, I said, sure, I'll be out. Now, at the time, I didn't have a watch on, and I didn't think much of it. But I went out, picked him up, and as I was taking him home, my stomach kicked in. And I asked him if he wanted to get something to eat. Well, there was a truck stop not too far from his house, so we stopped there and got some dinner. And I remember when we left, I looked at the clock. And it was around 7 o'clock or so, somewhere in there. And we left from there. I think I had gotten a soda, because I typically do. When I go out to a restaurant, typically, when I'm taking the check to pay for it, I'll grab a soda and so forth. Just because, kind of, I always have one with me, type of thing. Well, when we got to his house, he had a dog that was half wolf. And the dog was barking like crazy, which was nothing uncommon. But him and I sat in the driveway talking for a little bit because he was a Christian like I was. And there was one point the dog abruptly stopped barking. And the thing is, I don't know what happened to the soda that I would have had, but it wasn't in the car. And I had a sharp pain in my hip. And to the point where I did something I don't normally do, which was I took my belt out of my jeans and set it on the seat between us. At the time, I had a Dodge Aspen, so it had the bucket seats type of thing. Well, I said to him about going and getting something to drink. I asked him if he wanted to come with me. We regularly hung out, so he was sure. Now, it was dark, but I didn't think much of it because typically him and I would sit and shoot the shit in his driveway for a while sometimes. It would just depend on if we would get on a subject and just get to talking. Well, instead of going to the truck stop, which would have been the closest, I drove towards town. And as I was driving out on a country road, I don't know if he had noticed first or if I did, but we had seen an object in the sky in a triangle light formation. There were 3 lights on it. And there was a beam of light that was first pointed to the side, and I had pulled the car over and we were watching this thing. It shifted while we were sitting there and pointed straight down. Then it shifted to the side, and that quick it was gone. And I had looked at him and I was, holy shit, we just saw a UFO. And I was stunned because it was the first time I had ever seen anything of that nature. He was very obsessed with what time is it. And the Dodge Aspen that I had didn't have a clock in it, so I don't know, and I had figured maybe 8, 9 o'clock at the latest. I drove into town, and when I got there, I saw the streetlights were flashing yellow and red. And I had remarked to him, that's weird, they shouldn't do that till after midnight. And we went through town, and I went back to the convenience store that he worked at, and when I went to get a soda, he went over to the clock. I was halfway to the register when he came over to me and said, Greg, we were abducted. I looked at him and said, no, you were. I wasn't. I couldn't accept it. I couldn't. He said, look at the clock. I looked at the clock. It was almost 12:30. I was, holy shit. We had lost hours. Well, I took him home and dropped him off, and we didn't talk at all in his driveway. At that point, I was freaked. And when I went home, I had this directive kind of back here of look at your body. I sleep in the nude, so it was one, okay, no problem. I remember looking on my right hip. I had 2 pinhole marks about an inch apart, and on my right knee I had a circular hole. The hole was a perfect circle, as round as the end of a cigarette. No redness, no anything, just a circular hole. Almost like the scoop mark that is typical. I didn't know about the scoop mark or anything of that nature at the time, but I was freaked. Well, I talked to him after that, and he had said he had no marks on him, and he theorized that it wasn't him they were interested in, but me. Which kind of had me wondering why. And it doesn't make all that much sense except for the fact of the transition that I was making away from Christianity. But over the next 6 months, I had multiple. That was the only one that I remember seeing a UFO. I had others where I woke up and had marks on my back that, not to jump ahead with that one, I was awake for about an hour, and I had this nagging feeling, this nagging voice in the back of my head saying, look at your back, look at your back, look at your back, look at your back, and it got irritating. I had smoked a cigarette or so. I'd been up for about an hour. Finally, I went to my room, took my shirt off, looked at my back, and I had red lines going across my back. And I was like, wait a minute. If I'd been laying a certain way in bed, they would have faded by now. What the fuck is going on? There was another point after work at the adult bookstore. I worked second shift. I would go to sleep typically around 3, 4 in the morning, somewhere in there, because I would get off work around midnight. I had gone to bed like I normally would, and there was one point I remember my eyes were closed, and I had the thought in my head of open your eyes. I couldn't open my eyes. The thought was, okay, move your arm, move your leg, move something, move. I couldn't move. I was completely immobilized. When I did wake up the next day, on my right ankle, I had another circular hole, identical to the one that had been on my knee. And it was just a bunch of weird, what the fuck is going on? And where it gets real strange, and I don't really have an explanation for it, is after I came to the realization at 24 that I couldn't be a Christian because I couldn't go along with the torture of somebody else just because they think differently, the missing time, abductions, all that shit stopped completely. And I had thought that it was over. And I was not disappointed in the slightest. I went on with my life and didn't think much of it. Now, I would research things like Buddhism, Wiccan. I had looked into Satanism. I looked into different belief systems. Didn't have anything of that nature happening. But then a thought had occurred to me. What language did Adam and Eve speak? It's a weird thought. It's a weird question because it's not mentioned in the Bible. And I was pondering that, and whatever had guided me, I had termed it the divine back when I was a Christian. Now I have no idea what it would be. But I had clearly heard, look in the Satanic Bible. And I was like, that seems like a weird place to look. But when I did, I came across what Anton LaVey called Enochian. It's also called Enochian, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And he had claimed that it was the language of angels, and I'm just kind of, all right, sure, fine. I started looking into Enochian. Now, I had found out a few things regarding Enochian, like that it came about from John Dee and Edward Kelly, so it's suspect as far as being a language of angels or any of that shit. But in the aspect of Adam and Eve, and logically, because I had dealt with one idiot not too long ago, just the other day, that tried claiming Adam and Eve spoke Hebrew, which had me just about going, just because the book of Genesis, like Exodus, Numbers, and so forth, were written in Hebrew because Moses wrote them in Hebrew, doesn't mean that if Adam and Eve would have existed, that they would have spoke Hebrew. That is just so absurd. boggles my mind how anybody could even try to make that assertion. The thing is, it doesn't mention specifically anywhere in the text what language they spoke. But it wouldn't have been Hebrew. Now, the interesting thing with Enochian is that the pronunciation is very similar to Hebrew, because there are no vowels per se. There is an arbitrary vowel sound that is put in, and it's something that I had found interesting. And I was looking into, and I read a book on Enochian magic and things of that nature. It just was something that I had found intriguing. And then I went to basic. I had enlisted in the Army, went to basic, and didn't think much of it. There was about 4 months that I was away at basic training with the Army. Between my basic training and my AIT, with going down to Fort Bliss, Texas, for my MOS, which was 88 Mike. And then when I got back and I was at my apartment, I had come across, before I left, about the Sumerians, ancient Sumer. But I hadn't really looked into that all that much. It was one of those things that was waiting for me when I got home, that I would resume my research. And I did. But this time, instead of looking into Enochian further, I shifted to looking at ancient Sumer, the Sumerians, and the story of the Anunnaki. And for those that are familiar with Zecharia Sitchin and what he had put forward, the Anunnaki were the gods of the Sumerians, or the Sumerians. They're Sumerians. Ancient Sumer became known as Babylon. Babylon is what we call Iraq. The thing is, shortly after I started looking into the Sumerians and the Enuma Elish, which is the Epic of Creation, as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh, things of that parallel the Old Testament Genesis account, there was one point I had gotten together with a black woman that, oddly enough, her name was Princess, and she came over to my apartment at one point, and I had just woke up, and I was sitting in my chair in front of my computer, and she was on my bed behind me, and she remarked that the back of my neck was bleeding. She went in my bathroom and got a washcloth and was wiping the back of my neck, center of the back of my neck, and she said, "You are bleeding." She's like, "There's no hole or cut that I can see, but blood is coming out of your neck." And she was freaked. And I don't remember if my shirt had been on. I think it might have been that she wanted me to take that off, so I did. And that was when she had seen a red line going across my back, from my spine to my shoulder. One line going straight across. And on my arm, I had two that were about 1 inch apart and about 1.5 inches long. She asked me what I had been into, and I said, "I don't know. I have no memory." That was when she was freaked. Now, bear in mind, both her and I were atheists. And as far as I know, she still is. The thing is, she had a hard time dealing with this weird shit that was happening again in my life, and it was just a weird bit of what the fuck. But it did center around the aspect of Sumer, and that's where I started to make the connection of, wait a minute, could this be happening again because the god of Sumer and the god of the Bible is the same alien race? I don't know. But one thing that I know that is really weird is there are over 360 references to clouds, thrones, chariots as vehicles in the Bible, in the not just Old Testament, but Old and New. The thing is, people at that time would not have termed them UFOs. They would have termed them things that they would have been able to envision, be it a cloud, a throne, a chariot, things that were of their world. They wouldn't have used terminology of anything from our world because they wouldn't have any term. They wouldn't know of that. So the aspect flying saucer, flying disc, no. They would have been thinking of it and picturing it and associating it with things that they would have understood. I can't say definitively that the God is an alien, but that makes far more sense than it being a spooky thing. Which, there was one point, the former business partner that I had with Flagship Radio, I had said to him at one point, I want to meet your deity. And I don't know if he did a ritual or whatnot that he contacted it or however the fuck, I don't know. But that night, I had the only missing time experience that I remember being on the ship. And remember interacting with them. And oddly enough, it was the only experience I had that was actually fun. I remembered, I found myself on this huge ship. The people that were in front of me looked human. They were just extremely tall. I would say 7 to 8 foot at least. Their uniforms were blue. There was an insignia on their uniform, but meant nothing to me. And they had said to me at one point about turning around. And I did, and when they spoke, it wasn't audibly. It wasn't like I am now. Their mouth did not move. But I heard them very clearly. Here. What I have come to realize is telepathy. That it could deal with what is termed, on us we have it, it's the pineal gland. It is a gland in the center of the brain that with us it's very small. And it makes me wonder, if the pineal gland is larger, does that enable telepathic abilities? It makes me curious. I don't know. But when I turned around, I saw the Earth from space. And I felt my legs get weak. It was I had the feeling of vertigo. I was like, oh shit. I remember I asked them at one point, what do you eat? And they took me to a room and they showed me vegetables. And I may have said, fuck, I'm going to starve. Because I remember hearing laughter in my head. They were amused at because I'm a meat eater and that, I'm not giving up my meat. I like my meat too damn much. And I don't like vegetables. I'm just not a vegetarian. I can't do it. But I remember before being back type of thing, I don't know if I was actually in control of the ship, but it seemed like it. I was sitting at controls. And I'm thinking, are these people crazy enough to let me actually fly this thing? I was having fun with it. I don't know if I was actually doing anything. But if I was, holy shit, they have balls. It's like, shit, I'm a good driver, but I never operated anything of that caliber before. But it was a lot of fun. the thing is, that was the only experience I had with that particular type. And I've come to understand that type of ET is termed the Pleiadians. And I had said to my former business partner at that time, if that's his deity, I would have no problem interacting with them more. I would like to, actually. I mean, even if it would be setting myself up for another experience like that, so be it. I would really enjoy interacting with someone from that race again, and even if they would be willing, doing a video with them, I would love to do it. Now, that would be a bit weird because of the telepathy aspect. I don't know how that would come across. I just don't know. But I would like to have them on camera. I don't know if they can speak. I just don't know. But it's something I would like to, if I could. That would really be real cool. But that wasn't the last experience that I had. I had the, if you want to say, delusion or false hope that so long as I would be on a military base, that I would be safe. And that, to use the term fantasy, wasn't challenged or disproved until about 2008. I had enlisted in the military in 2006. It was around 2008, and before I get to that, there was one point after the issue with the back of my neck, I started to feel a circular hole at the back of my neck. To the point where, when I went to drills, I lowered my head and pointed to the back of my neck, and I said, "What the hell is this?" Guys in my unit said, "You have a hole in the back of your neck." And they were, "It's no big deal, it's healing." And I was like, and I had said, "Is it as round as this?" And they were, "Yeah, it's a perfect circle." And I was like, oh, fuck. I had seen it before, twice. And the weird part with that was I felt this back there for almost a year before I went and got a webcam. And then at one point I just was, all right, I got to see this goddamn thing. So I put the webcam on. It did the countdown type of thing. I spun myself around, and the first picture that was taken was of, I thought initially that it was something I fucked up because there was a red spot on the back of my neck, and I was about to discard it. I had taken other pictures, and none of them showed anything. But that first one kind of stuck here. And I had the thought of invert the colors. I don't know why I had the thought of invert the colors. But when I did, I nearly fell over. Because the face that was on the back of my neck, literally, it's like it jumped out at me. I don't know. There was another point when I was talking to my girlfriend that I now live with. There was one point on my bed I had noticed a large handprint. I don't think it's alien in nature. That gets more into the aspect of ghosts. But it was a massive handprint on my bed. And I have big hands, but this handprint was way bigger than my hands. I don't know. But when I was with the Army, there was one point, we had 3 weeks where we were up at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania, and my unit was preparing to go to Iraq. And I didn't know my ass wasn't going at that point. But about 2 weeks in, I went to sleep like I normally did, and the way I had things set up with my bunk was I had put some of my military gear around the bed so that it would give me kind of walls type of things, just so I would have a bit more privacy. I had gone to sleep like I normally did, and that was when I had another encounter, but it was one of I saw grays, and I saw a bunch of them. I remember physically interacting with them and fighting as much as I could. The last thing I saw before waking up was the large black eyes, frail face, gray skin, inches from mine. I woke up, my heart slamming in my chest, and my initial thought was, where am I? I didn't know initially. It took me a little bit to get my bearings on where I was. But I had about an hour before the rest of the guys in my unit woke up. But I was up. There was no way I was going back to sleep. Not after that. I don't know what the hell that was. I mentioned it to a sergeant in my unit. He dismissed it as a dream. And I didn't say any more about it. I dropped it. But it didn't feel like a dream. I've had dreams that, no. Well, it wasn't long after that I found out from my unit that I was going to not be going to Iraq, because I was going to be having a battle with the Army over the subject of UFOs and aliens. More or less, the Army was going to try to get rid of me, because I had openly and brazenly talked about things that they don't want people talking about. And I ended up, when my unit went to Iraq, I stayed behind and ended up having a conference with a doctor that I had written a report, 10 pages, on debunking delusional disorder was the title I gave it. And in it, I had gone through and listed the classifications of delusional disorder, what the symptoms were, and there was even a checklist of like 10 or so things that someone with delusional disorder would exhibit. And I went through and showed where these things are far more likely to come from somebody that is religious than an atheist talking about aliens. And I remember one of them was about like beliefs being alien and so forth, and my beliefs aren't alien, but they're about aliens, and it was one of, wait a minute, now I'm in a sense making fun of my beliefs, which was another one of sensitivity to a belief that when I went through it, what I showed very clearly was that these things are far more common with religious belief and the believers of a religion than an atheist talking about aliens. And one of the resounding things in my report was my credibility is not questioned when I am asked to go somewhere and see if something is at a particular location. If I say no, or I go back and I give my report, it's not questioned. Or if an incident would happen and I'd be in a truck and I would do a report on whatever the incident was, the things that I would put in the report wouldn't be questioned. But the moment I mention aliens and abductions and missing time, then my credibility is questioned. Then, and only then, is my sanity brought in, and this is double standard. And in the course of about 90 minutes, I was medically cleared. When I recounted to the doctor the first case of missing time that I told you, he had remarked about the detail of my memories. And that even though I have massive holes in my memories, there's a lot of things that I do remember very clearly. And he had said that that could be threatening to some. That he had asked people at one point if it would be proven that aliens exist, would that alter your belief in a God? He said some people said yes, some people said no. One woman attacked him with her cane. So he knew. Because I went into it and I asked him, basically, have you reached a conclusion before I say anything? Because if you have, and you've already reached the conclusion that I'm delusional, then there's nothing I can say. And he was, no, I haven't. But what I was told was pretty much shut up about it. Don't talk about it. Because if you talk about this type of thing happening more, you will find yourself on a military base. Pretty much you will disappear as far as everyone is concerned. You will be on a military base and you will be examined. And I had the thought, yeah, I don't like being poked and prodded by aliens. I don't want to be poked and prodded by the U.S. military. So I kept my mouth shut. It had been asked of me, what do you want to do? What do you want type of thing, in a questionnaire before I met with the doctor. And I had said, I took an oath to do 6 years. I want to fulfill my contract. Well, the doctor had asked me, what do I want? And I have no doubt, if I would have said I want out, I would have been discharged. I would have been released. They were prepared to pretty much give me whatever, in a sense, what I wanted. And what I wanted, and I told him, I want to fulfill my contract. I took an oath. I'm a man of my word. I said I would do 6 years. I would do 6 years, damn it. And I did. And he had told me, I was prepared going into that, of whatever bullshit explanation he would try to give, that I was going to be, okay, that explains it. I wasn't going to play games. I wasn't going to try and, the skeptical side of me, well, I wasn't playing at that point. And he had asked me if I had head injuries as a kid, and as you can see, this isn't so much from when I was a kid, but I have a scar on my forehead from a car accident. I've had multiple head injuries. Multiple. This particular one on my forehead is from where my head hit the sun visor. And doctors had said at that point I was very lucky to not be paralyzed or dead, because people that came in with the type of accident that I had are typically paralyzed or dead. And my forehead hit the sun visor on the car, which pretty much meant, because I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the steering wheel had been bent by my chest, and I didn't have any pain here. I just had a bit of a stiff neck. And that, I didn't understand with that accident just how lucky I was, because I wanted a cigarette. I didn't give a damn about anything else. And that was when the doctor had told me, you're lucky to be walking. I don't know if anything was protecting me. I have no evidence of any of that. But that was before I was 24. That was earlier in that. The thing is, when he said about different head injuries, I was just kind of rolling my eyes and being, all right, fine. Well, I got medically cleared, and then I didn't talk about it for the rest of the time that I was in the Army, up until I only had about 2 months left. It was about, I should say, a month left. I had a summer camp, 2 weeks up at the Gap, right before I was going to be released. That the next month would be my last month, that I wouldn't even be going in uniform because I would be turning in my uniform at the end of that 2-week summer camp. And I turned in all my uniforms except for like underwear and undershirts. Anything that was directly touching my skin, I got to keep. And my boots. But when there was a few days left in the summer camp, one of the sergeants got me started on the subject, and I answered questions the best I could. If I knew the answer, I wasn't going to make something up, but if I knew an answer and we had it pretty much for a bowl session. And at the time I had chewing tobacco, Kodiak, because it was we were in the building and it was easier than interrupting it to go out and smoke a cigarette to be, all right, I'm going to put a dip in my mouth and do it that way, and I can continue to talk to them. We did that up until the point one of the sergeants came in and looked around and was like, all right, who got him started? Well, one guy had said, kind of raised his hand, was like, I did. And I knew at that point, all right, shut up. So I did. It wasn't anything, nothing came of it, because it was at that point, the sergeant knew that it was yeah, I'm just about out. So, in a sense, who cares? But there were a lot of young people that were new to the unit that were very interested in the subject. And that was one where I had gotten a question of, because my atheism came out, and that was as much of an irritant or a making me stand out as the alien subject. Because the idea of woo-woo and buying into religious bullshit, it was common, and it was something that a lot of them, there's a lot in the military that buy into religion. And one woman had asked me about, what do you believe in, because don't atheists believe in nothing? And I was like, no, atheism is just a disbelief in gods. It's not a disbelief in anything. And that was where it wasn't so much about aliens at that point as it was atheism. But they both begin with an A, so I guess in that regard it's along the same lines, at least for them. But all in all, I haven't had any missing time or whatnot since then. It almost seems, at least from where I'm looking at it, hold on. Hold on, dear. One sec. Alright, well, I hope you enjoy this video. I gotta go. Later.